Right. Wait for Steph. Oh, here we go. We're going to try to do a little kind of a wrap up on the Four Noble Truths and why we've been using, again, the Tibetan tradition of mental development, which is this really detailed exposition by a Gelugpa Geshe Nawang Darge, um, on this exposition of the Four Noble Truths. And then we're just going to touch on the discussion of the Four Noble Truths in this book, Mahamudra, The Quintessence of Mind and Meditation, which is this amazing text by Dakpo Tashi Namgyal. Dakpo was the region of Tibet that Dampopa was from. So Tashi Namgyal is one of the great texts of Tibetan Buddhism, like 1,000 years old, maybe not quite that old, but nonetheless going through Mahamudra. Um, so, why are the Four Noble Truths really important and often kind of skipped over, which is interesting to me? So Gretchen and I had been practicing, Buddhism at a Western Zen center for, let me think, maybe 8 years, something like that. We did a pilgrimage to India and Nepal. We flew to Delhi, the capital of India, and we were staying at the YMCA, which is this really beautiful old place, but from obviously British colonial times. Excuse me. So it was kind of a wonderful example of kind of faded elegance. You could get a breakfast there, and the breakfast was a big dining room. And I mean, they had like real silver. And then all these people waiting on you. I mean, it was just really kind of funny, but very, very colonial. Uh, and the culture shock was really pretty great if you've never been to India. And it was, I think, especially hard on Gretchen because, we were leaving a rather protected state. We had been on the staff of the Zen Center for 3 years. They provide you with room and board, and I think it was a $60 a month stipend. And it's a very kind of cohesive, cohesive community. So you had lots of emotional support, and at that time, everyone there was kind of like the same kind of class and experience. These were all people sort of coming out of the counterculture. Uh, so we went and we were leaving that, and we weren't leaving to anything. I mean, I didn't have a job or anything, and we wanted to have children, but we weren't quite there yet. So she had a lot of kind of nervousness, I think. And then we got to India, and the culture shock in India is amazing because imagine, for instance, there weren't set prices on anything. you wanted to buy a tube of toothpaste, you found yourself haggling with some guy over what the price should be. And in the street, you'd be assaulted by beggars, um, some of which were real and really some very, very sad situations that you're cripples and things that you're thrown up against and the blind people and all sorts of things, but also all sorts of, you know, hordes of urchins, street urchins who were just hassling you for money again and again and again because you stand out as a Westerner. So Gretchen was having a lot of culture shock about this. But at one point, she whipped up her courage, she told me later, and went out to a shop. We were on the edge of the Tibetan quarter. Um, and there was a shop. It wasn't a Tibetan shop actually, but it was a shop that was selling, Buddha statues and various kind of ritual things, Indian. Um, and so Gretchen was in, and she saw this little statue of the Buddha that she liked, and she was looking at it. And the Indian, also India was so fascinating because at that time I think we were maybe what, a billion people in India, and this is 1981, maybe 900 million, I'm not sure. But of that, they had like 300 million people who spoke English because it was the colonial language. India's constitution recognizes 13 different national languages, but English was the one that sort of united the educated classes. So it became kind of the unofficial language of India in some way, at least their commercial class. So anyway, there are a lot of people knowing English, but who have never spoken to a native speaker. So that made for some interesting things too, just as a little aside to give you the flavor of it. So at one point, we were dealing with traveler's checks, right? At that time, and we needed to cash a traveler's check. So we went to an Indian bank, figuring that's where you uh, cash traveler's check, and it had an American Express sign in the window, so we knew we were in the right place. And I mean, at that point, I haven't been since, but the chaos of India, you stand in a big line inside the bank, and then they give you permission to go to another line. And you stand in that line, and then they give you a little token, and then you stand in a third line. And at the end of that third line, you give you a little token that prove your bona fides, I guess, and you could cash your traveler's check. So I'm standing in all these lines, right? And meanwhile, they're advertising to you with, like banks do, little statements. And here's this little promotional thing that says, "Consider investing in one of our money making schemes." And that was so India to me because they were using the word correctly. It's kind of Kempo does that a lot too. He's saying if you look in the dictionary, yeah, meaning number 5, that's what he's using. It's correct if you were on a test or something, but no one knows what he's talking about. So she's looking at this Buddha statues, little small Buddha, and the Indian shopkeeper, very friendly, says to her, "So, Madame, are you a follower of the Eightfold Path?" to me right now, it sounds kind of creepy. But we had been, practicing Western Buddhism for, 8, 9 years. She didn't know what the Eightfold Path was. And of course, that's the fourth noble truth, the path to happiness. Somehow it got left out of our Buddhist education. So I think to myself, though, after America is so interesting because this is something that, I mean, the Tibetans learn, but I think for some reason their attitude is so different. They come from a culture where there's basic credibility in Buddhism. They're not debating its validity. And so therefore what you're being taught is all very kind of practical, and there's really no attempt to even inspire, really. They're just giving you this straight scoop. It's like talking to your auto mechanic or something, what's wrong and how you can fix it. I mean, it's all very practical in that. But of course, as Americans, we don't sit down and read a book like this and memorize it like the Tibetans do. I mean, you can see, for instance, at Garchen Monastery, Megan taught the children there once upon a time. And, you know, with the Tibetans, they do this rote, this memory. They're just repeating these classical texts. I mean, they're simplified texts for the children when they're starting to learn, but they don't even know really what they're saying. They're just memorizing it. So it's in their mind. And then later they start to study it and debate it and all of that. But it's this fundamental, it's like us learning our ABCs. This is the practical stuff. You're going to want to have this in your mind. Don't worry about the meaning. Don't worry about whether the B came from beta or how the Greeks did they get something from Sanskrit or did the Arabs sneak in there and do something. You know, it doesn't matter. For us as Americans, though, it's not how we generally approach the Dharma. More, it's out of actually, and this is the good thing. Garinpoche says it's great because Americans are coming from their own existential reasons, basically. If not existential, at least psychological, and thinking, oh, maybe there's some benefit here. We see the contradictions in our own society, and it's really profound. I mean, the more time I spend on this, the farther I go, the more experience you have. You see how powerful ignorance is. You know, the way that we're taught, we just sort of think of ignorance as like, oh, just open a different book, it'll go away. But ignorance is the most dynamic force in the universe. It's unbelievable. And it's unbelievable because we don't see that it's occluded at all. We think of it as truth, as reality, as everything. So that's really, really powerful. Maybe a story that I shouldn't share, but I remember I was 4 or 5 years old, and I don't even know what my complaint was. It must have been something, uh, that I wasn't eating or I wasn't doing something that my mother thought I should be doing in an elementary kind of way. I don't know. But I remember going to the doctor. I was like 4 years old, and they were going to do a barium enema on me so they could do an x-ray. Back in those days, they didn't have, it wasn't as sophisticated as they do now. So they made you eat all this incredible chalk-like stuff, and it allowed for x-rays to x-ray your digestive tract. And I remember the doctor telling me, okay, you're going to swallow this and you're going to feel like you have to defecate, like you're going to have to go to the bathroom, but you won't have to. So it'll just feel that way. So you just bear with it, and then we'll do the x-ray and this will be done. It's not painful. And so, I'm a first child. I was very good at following rules and doing what I was told. And yep, absolutely, absolutely. So I drank that stuff down and I started screaming, I got to go to the bathroom. It went out the window immediately. We just can't believe. So when someone tells you that this is all dreamlike, Garinpoche says all of the Dharma is just simply cause and effect and emptiness. The dreamlike, it's all just simply, the other way he's divided it up is that it all comes down to training yourself to see and consider all beings as having been your mother, and it's all a dream or dream-like. It's not completely a dream, but dream-like. So there's a reality there, but it's a reality that we look away from because we want to find something solid, something that will be a true refuge for our little ego, where no one come in and make trouble, and we're completely protected. And yet we can sort of venture out and grab what we want and come back to our little refuge. We're really that primitive, but we don't know it because we're not even looking at it. We don't want to even look at the situation. So we're just off all the time in distraction. And these distractions can be very, very subtle. They can be very, very tragic. So, yeah, Four Noble Truths. And I think to myself, as Americans, we have some sort of dissatisfaction. And that's why I think knowledge of the First Noble Truth is so important, because that's how we come to the Dharma. Most Tibetans are not saying, oh, I'm not quite happy with my life. I mean, if you look at Tibet traditionally, sure, they're human beings. There was happiness, suffering, all those things. But they didn't have this kind of, I don't think they had guilt as a people. if your life wasn't perfect, like in America. I mean, we got tremendous amounts of anxiety and depression and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I think a lot of our eating craziness is just attempt to just, satisfy some sort of worm digging at your heart. You just cover it up with a donut. I do that myself. Works temporarily, but so much. So I think for us, especially important is the first noble truth, because it's dealing right with, once you have a true appreciation of the first noble truth, you're on the path. You're not going anywhere else, because you're engaged in the right way. I want the end of suffering. I want less suffering in my life. In fact, the less that I have, I want less and less and less. So I think to myself, think of the Buddha. What do you do? You're sitting under a tree. In ancient India, you've done this incredible renunciation. I mean, walking away from your palace, your firstborn child, the wife that he loved. He didn't have any of the hangups. This was all for like tremendous, and the courage. It's just hard to imagine. And it's also imagine the determination. I mean, unbelievable. He didn't have anybody on his side. At the end, he ended up with 5 people, and they rejected him too. So at that point, what happens? You're under a tree in the jungle in India, and you come to omniscience. So suddenly you understand. You've seen this whole process that he went through that night of the origin of suffering. How does suffering come about? And how do we fit into this, and how we're doing it? We're creating it all. Wonder of wonders. It's not some outer circumstance doing stuff to us. Yes, it appears that way. And there are outer conditions, you might say, that are contributing. Yes, 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 yes. But the root cause is us. Boy, nobody wants to look at that. Like Professor Kanzi says in one of his books, it's just so remarkable to him. This is 1964. And in the academic circles that he traveled his entire life, entire professional life, he says that oceans of academic scholarly ink are spilled, studying some remote culture in the Botswana, or in the Amazon rainforest, or somewhere in deepest Laos. I mean, all these things. We're just all over the place trying to understand all these different things, and there's money for it, and societal support, and honors, and it's accepted, and all this kind of stuff. This kind of investigation, and I think no one's against that, really. Nothing wrong with that. But he says it's so interesting at a time when easily we spill oceans of ink on studies like this in the academy. There's virtually no interest in the Mahayana. And he said it's really amazing, because actually the answers are there. He said the denizens, he said, of our civilization. It's like Paul Gauguin, that French painter, the friend of Gauguin, friend of who's the guy with the ear, Van Gogh. Or if I'm going to be really fancy, Van Gogh. Anyway, uh, he went to Tahiti looking for kind of a paradise, and I guess he found a degree of happiness there too, and certainly some beautiful paintings that came from it. But he said our civilization is full of people looking for their own personal Tahiti. And yet, the wonder of wonders, here we have the Mahayana with its flowering descriptions of the Pure Land, and its practical, down to earth practices that can be done, and to see the benefits, even in an immediate kind of way. I mean, we've all had the experience where, you sit down for maybe like a weekend sitting or something like that, and you don't really want to be there, but nonetheless, I really should, so I go, and you've scheduled the time, and then you sit down, and there's 20 other people sitting with you, so there's some social pressure that we can't be playing our radio while during the meditation session. I mean, it all works, we're doing that voluntarily, of course, but you sit down for that 30 minutes of meditation, and your mind is just raging, just out of control. Obsessions, just stupid stuff. I remember my first time I tried to meditate, I was having all sorts of arguments with my mother-in-law. Excuse me. And uh, I remember even how the instructions to lower your eyes, right? So I was sitting facing a wall and lowering my eyes, but then without awareness. I mean, it's like after 5 minutes, my eyes were like just had a life of their own. We resist our distraction. So I think, excuse me, I think of the Buddha. Imagine what he went through, the motivation that had to have been there. And then coming to omniscience. I mean, what do you do? It just makes complete credibility to me that he hesitated to teach. I mean, we see this in our own lives. You can have valid insights in your life, and yet 99.99999% of your experience is the same old stuff again and again and again. It's amazing. It's amazing. We're living in a tsunami of distraction, and we seek it out, But the Dharma is that light that's illuminating all that, because now it's distraction. Already that's wisdom. But nonetheless, back to the Buddha. What do you do? What do you teach? Where do you start with something like that? They say it's like Alexander the Great when he invaded Turkey, so invaded Asia for the first time, and the legend is they took him to this town in Gordian, and I can't remember the name of the town, but in Turkey, and there was a cart, like an ox cart, and there was this huge knot of rope that was tying just a big ball called the Gordian knot, and there was a prophecy that in order to conquer Asia, you had to be able to undo this knot, and no one had been able to do it. People have been trying for decades or who knows how long trying to untie this thing. And so they presented that to Alexander, thinking that, okay, we got him now. This will be the end of it. The mighty Persian Empire, the most powerful empire of its time. Now he's on their home turf, so to speak. But he didn't hesitate. He took his sword and just cut it in half. It was so meaningful. But that's our mind. We're a Gordian knot. We've got all these layers of complexity and stuff and whatever. But Manjushri's sword, wisdom, cuts through it. And that wisdom experiences us in our ordinary dualistic state. We don't have to go anywhere else or change. We experience that as objectless compassion. So there's the whole thing. He taught. And what did he teach? First, he found the 5 students who had rejected him. To their view, he had abandoned the spiritual path because he wasn't torturing himself anymore physically. And he taught the first noble truth, that all life is suffering, is dissatisfactory. This always rings wrong to our American ears because I want to be positive, If I say that life is dissatisfactory, I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot. I want to help other people, and there are lots of good things. But those are only the first 2 noble truths. The first 2 noble truths, and yet one other thing. What's remarkable about the first noble truth is that how it's universal, how it applies to everyone, has nothing to do with culture, has nothing to do with ethnicity, race, nationhood, historicity, or even species. Everybody relates to suffering and the different levels of it, dissatisfaction. The more profound one's view, it becomes very, very subtle. But yet, everyone can relate. Everyone that you come in contact with, you can be aware of their suffering or be open to the possibility that there is suffering going on there. And so when people immediately are doing wacko things to you or whatever strange responses or dissatisfaction, you know where it's coming from. And so what's the source of that suffering? Well, you start to see this clinging to self. So suddenly it all starts putting together. But nonetheless, it's so remarkable that this is his teaching. Yeah, the first noble truth, all life is suffering. The second noble truth, sufferings are generated by causes. So the first two truths reveal the wrong view of life. And that's so important. And that's often what the first European, rediscoverers, you might say, of Buddhism, because way back to Alexander the Great, they had contact with Buddhism, and especially 200 years later with Ashoka, and then all the Greek colonies in Afghanistan and the Middle East. We know historically that there were Buddhist monks in Alexandria, the capital of Alexandria's empire. He built this city on the coast in northern Egypt. The first and second truths reveal the wrong view of life. That's so positive because it's the third and fourth is in the right view of life, the path out of it. So again, people who first came across, Europeans especially in the 1800s, they came across Buddhism again. It seemed pessimistic. That was the term they used, because life is suffering. Just sounds like, oh, this terrible thing. I think they were had a Protestant kind of influence, unknowing. And so it was just like, you just have to grin and bear it, right? But that's not it. It's the next two noble truths is the way to happiness. So yeah, first noble truth, all life is suffering. Second noble truth, sufferings are generated by causes. I mean, it brings up the possibility, well, if there are causes, what if you remove the cause? And of course, there you go. That's the third noble truth. The elimination of suffering and the cause of suffering. Then the fourth noble truth, the realization of the path. So positives of positives presents this incredibly positive vision. I mean, it's hard to, you can't really overemphasize it, because if you have this deep understanding of how dissatisfactory our usual machinations and even existence, our seemingly biological existence, the limitations of it, that you stop looking for absolute answers in something that's relative, something that's conventional. And truthfully, all of Buddhism comes out of those. That's his first teaching. It's called the first turning of the wheel. It said that the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma 3 times in his life. 3 great categories. And this is the first turning of the wheel, which again leads to happiness, leads to nirvana, does not lead to Buddhahood. So it's very, very kind of, you might say, realistic in what it's proposing. Because I don't know if people could handle it. It's said in the second turning of the wheel, the teachings of great emptiness that the Buddha gave with the perfection of wisdom teachings that he gave on Vulture Mountain in Rajgir, India. It said when he first taught great emptiness that half the monks got up and walked out. And to us, that doesn't seem like too much. Yeah, I can easily believe that. But again, can you imagine India? The obligation that you have to a teacher. I mean, you can think about it. We don't have a sense of caste and all these kinds of, the structure of Indian society at the time. But the idea of getting up and walking out of your teacher, and these are already Buddhist monks, I mean, they've already taken refuge, and they obviously have been practicing a great deal. I mean, the profundity of the Four Noble Truths. You read of the accomplishment of the arhats. I mean, it's amazing. So these are accomplished men and women, and you get up and you walk out on the Buddha. I mean, who does that? So this is how radical these teachings are. Second turning the wheel, the great emptiness. And then later he turned the wheel again, teachings on Buddha nature. So we're back to the beginning, the first turning of the wheel. Life is dissatisfactory. How wonderful. If you really understand that, immediately our own suffering is less, because underneath everything is this pain that when we suffer, that it shouldn't be this way. It's like in a way we have this kind of inchoate wisdom we don't give ourselves credit for, but even this sense of serious dissatisfaction, even depression that we have. It's because we have some sort of sense that it's not just that I'm hurting, but I shouldn't have to hurt like this. There's a huge should and ought in there. It's like they say the suffering on top of the suffering. It relates to the subtle suffering. That the nature of things is dissatisfactory, not just the outer experience of it. So that's pretty heavy. But then when you're confronted with, but there are causes, and remove the cause, you remove the suffering. And here's how you do it, the Eightfold Path. So then everything becomes workable because you can challenge it. The Buddha's saying, don't believe something because I said it. Don't believe it because some wise man in your tradition or village said it. Don't say it because everybody agrees on it, but only after you test it and it meets with your experience, your reason and experience. So how wonderful is that? I mean, suddenly we are empowered, and all of the Dharma flows out of that. It's all increasingly vast and deep methods. Because why? Because there are 84,000 different kinds of human beings. We're all an amazing amalgam of past karma, past habits, things that we've been conditioned in this lifetime, whatever. There isn't like some, you might say, predetermined path, the path with a capital P. It's completely dynamic. It's completely flexible. You can have an interaction with a great teacher that it's not in the text, and yet it's the essence of that text. It's like compassion in a pure way, and it's not some saccharine thing that you can write home about. It's just a moment of a spark, kind of like the vividness, the vividness that a child experiences. Everything is new again. The flowers, the butterflies, whatever. I see my granddaughters, you just see everything new. I mean, they're telling you some big story and something, and it's just so wonderful. You got this picture. I remember the first time they turned over, it's like rolling over is a big deal. But the joy, you see this smile on a little baby. So that vividness is our mind, but obviously it gets covered over with all our worries, with all our experiences, with all our distractions. This is a quality of the visualizations, is the vividness. That's a wonderful thing. But so first noble truth, second noble truth, third noble truth, fourth noble truth. Now the Geshe goes through incredible detail, as you've seen in this book. I mean, lists, and it's kind of dry and kind of overwhelming. And it's not the kind of thing like someone comes here for the first time, and I'm going to read this book to them. It just doesn't work that way. What is it? Why is someone here? They often don't even know, and that's all right. That's all right. There's There's something pure in each one of us, and that's manifesting. But then the higher teachings still teach the Four Noble Truths, but they do it with an increasingly subtle interpretation. So here, for instance, in this Mahamudra text, the 16 subdivisions, the Four Noble Truths deal with right and wrong view of cyclic existence. Each truth is described in terms of four principles. The first truth, all life is suffering, is further elucidated by four aspects. So the Geshe had like 13 or something. I can't remember. He has four here. Life is one, impermanent. Life is two, the outcome of an individual's own karma and mental defilement. So that's important because here it's our karma, right? What's manifesting for us, but it's also our mental development, because our karma is going to manifest, but at the same time, how it's colored depends on our own mental development. You have something negative happen, and you can just run in the other direction, or you can take it as a stimulus to practice the antidote to that negative mind, or you can transform the energy of that into just pure vision, or you can just see it directly, the nature of it. So our mental development is critical here. But nonetheless, the first noble truth, life is impermanent. Life is the outcome of an individual's own karma and mental defilement. Yet it is neither dependent upon nor controlled by a supra-personal power. And that's a tough one too. I mean, I've been listening lately to some Christian apologists.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not controlled by blank, some supra.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yet, although it's impermanent and the outcome of your own karma and mental defilement, yet it's neither dependent upon nor controlled by a supra-personal power. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. And fourthly, nor is endowed with a distinct self-essence. So there isn't some ego there, some distinct self-essence we can just non-dynamic thing we can clang onto, you know? It's the nature of our suffering. It's dynamic. And therefore, it's really kind of wind-like. It's adventitious, which means it isn't some solid thing that's going to defeat us. We have stuff we can do. I mean, it's so incredibly empowering. But super personal power, I've been, reading a little bit lately about some Christian apologists. Apologist is someone who explains Christianity. Yeah, especially the critics. Yeah, especially the critics. And I'm very, it's very impressive because there's some really sharp thinking there. And yet I'm always amazed when I read the Buddhist texts about how there's immediately stuff that can be done. There's like tools and this fundamental insight, which it doesn't give you the answer, but it points the finger. I mean, it's like treating everyone like an adult. Whereas all I can see is that, it's for the theist, it's often just a simple kind of belief. And then you just sort of, practice your virtue and do all the things. But the idea is that, next lifetime, it's going to be better because I had this kind of commitment and renunciation and faith and all positive qualities. But what's amazing to me is that there really isn't the teaching of your own transformation. Now, seeing how difficult that is, you understand the benefit for many people. I think it just can't hear it. I mean, I think about even our experience here with White Lotus. You can have an understanding of this, and I often feel a little humbled, even with my arrogant nature, because it took a long time before somehow I came even across these teachings. It's like you had to have a certain amount of stubbing your toe and experience and trying, even though you didn't quite know what you were doing, but you had some idea of what you wanted. But just the difficulties of meditation and in our American scene, with jobs and families and obligations and bills and then just the general crazy kind of social spiritual environment that we're in, where stuff is floating all over the place. I just remember my brother-in-law, he got all excited about it was a psychological thing about 30 years ago. I'm okay, you're okay. That was his thing. He thought that was the answer to everything. And I'm thinking, I'm not okay, and you're not okay either. But that sounds terrible, doesn't it? So, but I remember even in our Dharma center here, you know, uh, if you understand, people will put up with all sorts of stuff when they understand the incredible importance and value of how rare. Why does someone like Garwin Rinpoche spend any time thinking about this place at all? We're not part of his organization. You know, after he, excuse me, retired. Oh, I didn't really retire, but because of his health, they weren't going to ship him around all again. And the first thing they told him that he was only going to go to centers that were under the same legal kind of umbrella as the Garchin Institute. And so they told him that he couldn't come to Rochester because for various reasons, we're not part of the same structure. We're actually under Chetsang Rinpoche's umbrella, so to speak. And they wanted Rinpoche to take more time. So they were going to give him a vacation time. And he said, okay, that's good. Good. I like vacation, he said. On my vacation, I'm going to go to White Lotus. So they gave in and let him go. But I think to myself, the teaching in that, why? This is a very humble place. And until Kempo came, we didn't have any monks here or anything like that, as far as even sort of, keeping the transmission going, like you might say, which is American lay people banging around. But there's something sincere. And yet I remember, I've seen people who got into, you know, huge, like shouting arguments in the shrine room. And then people leave and come back and leave again and all this stuff. I'm not, no, no, I'm not pointing at you. No, no. My point is how fortunate we all are that despite the obscurations, somehow it has still come together. But my deeper point is with the First Noble Truth, once you understand that, it just takes the ultimate sting out of everything. Because it's like whoever wrote that song, I never promised you a rose garden. The Buddha said that this is dissatisfactory, but that's not where it stops. That's where it starts, with that recognition. And for the first time, you're not running around looking. You've like determined that. So now you can work at it. It's like a diagnosis. Once there's that diagnosis, then you can try this, you can try that. Maybe this one works, maybe that one doesn't. Maybe the diagnosis, you're too far gone, but you're not. There's still the diagnosis. There's this glimmer of wisdom. And so there's almost always some sort of relief to the mind, because even if it's a scary diagnosis, at least you feel there's some sort of understanding instead of just mindless kind of suffering. Yeah, I used to wonder as a child, I just thought about the suffering of the animals, and I just thought, God, it's just so, it must seem so unfair. It's just coming out of the sky. And there's no idea. That's how I felt as a human being. Nothing you could do about it. Life was just a shit sandwich you had been served. So, the First Noble Truth. And yet, again, although I think I had come across that myself, it wasn't with the supporting teachings until, well, 1980, 85. So that's you know, 13 years. So we're exceptionally fortunate. And yeah, the Four Noble Truths. So that's the first one. Impermanent. It's the outcome of an individual's own karma and mental defilement. Nothing we can blame, neither dependent upon nor controlled by a superpersonal power. We're not like somehow nailed down and nothing we can do, hopeless, nor is it endowed with a distinct self essence. So we can't even blame ourselves. It's just this dynamic unfolding. Second truth, sufferings are generated by causes elucidated by four principles. So what is sufferings are generated by causes? First, a craving for sensory gratifications, according to Hinayana. All right, that's the cause. Craving for sensory gratifications. And self-delusion, according to the Mahayana. So there you start to see the differences in the teachings too. Because when they're presenting it in a self-liberation way, all the talk is about, desire, cravings, all these kinds of things. Yes, but there's a more subtle level. And this is what the Mahayana deals with, is that delusion itself. Because in the traditional self-liberation view of a self-liberation practitioner, outer reality is real. We start to see the unreality of the self. So we're searching for the self inside. We it's like we're dissecting the body with a mental scalpel, and we don't find anything in there. Where is the self? I say it's my ear, but is the ear the self? Well, no. And so you can go through these series of questions, and then you can look with your wisdom mind at seeing if there's something else there. And eventually you just get exhausted trying to find a self that doesn't exist. So it becomes at least a little more credible. Well, maybe that self doesn't exist in the way that I've been assuming it is. So how wonderful. That's the craving for sensory gratifications. When that's gone, like the Buddha said, when you take the tent pole away, the whole tent collapses. So sensory gratifications, that's our whole deal. And of course, you look out in the whole world, and that's generally what you're seeing. People just going, hell bent for leather for sensory gratifications. But self-delusion, that's a step further for the Mahayana. All right, so sufferings are generated by causes, second noble truth, four qualities. One, a craving for sensory gratifications, or for us, self-delusion. Two, the cycle of rebirth and death is the cause of all of this. Here we are. Third, such rebirth takes the level of a celestial, human, animal, spirit, or afflicted being. And so, again, the cause is that we're in this form that we're in, as are all these other beings. And then finally, fourth, the immediate condition for every rebirth is the vigorous yearning for sensory pleasures. So that's what's driving the wheel. We just want this more and more and more and more. And we're turning the wheel, and the wheel turns. And you find yourself in your next lifetime. Can't remember anything that happened, but here we are again, around and around. All right, so the first and second truths reveal the wrong view of life. The next two truths, with their descriptive principles, show the right view and a path to happiness. The third truth, the elimination of suffering and its cause, is permanent peace, nirvana. So these are the four principles of the elimination of suffering and its cause. Nirvanic peace is the transcendental state detached from suffering. So we call it nirvana. Such peace is the result of having eliminated mental defilements. So again, this incredible, empowering thing, it's up to us. We start to see the mental defilements. Can they be removed? Third, it is completely virtuous and enduring purity. So there's nothing to be afraid of there. It's totally positive. And five, it's a state of freedom through a non-degrading liberation. So important. Again, these Europeans coming onto the end of suffering and nirvana, they thought of it as some sort of like degrading liberation. It was just like totally negative. It was just anti-life. They would say things like that. You still see people that talk like that they don't know. And I can really not forgive people, but I understand how people get it wrong, because I think of myself getting so much wrong all the time. And I'm like a true believer. But nonetheless, the dusts are thick. The fourth truth, the realization of the path, four aspects. It is the process of developing wisdom, prajna, sharab in Tibetan. So the process of developing wisdom is the realization of the path. And also think how wonderful that is. Because again, we often live in such a realm of, I want the end result, So therefore, we somehow demean the things that we're doing, because this is just a method to get to where I really want to go. We don't see that the method is the result. The method is your Buddha nature manifesting right here in a way that is real, with all your limitations, with all your wrong ideas, with everything. There it is in the midst of that. We don't see how it's in the midst of it, but we can have faith in that. And that's what's very kind of hard to understand, I think, for many Western Buddhists. We think about some sort of wonderful place I want to get to, nirvana, realizations, end of suffering, happiness, all these positive things. We have that idea, and then we're just sort of going to do it on ourselves, because somehow the teachings are just that, I don't know, that's for Asians. So they didn't go to high school in Pittsburgh. They don't know. We're so smart. We got cell phones. But immediately, your practice is like validated with a capital V. So it is a process of developing wisdom. As a higher awareness, it eliminates the clinging to self. So you start to see that process. Clinging to self is still there, but it's less. The ignorance is still there, but it's not like layers and layers and layers of dust. You start to be able to sort of see a little bit transparently through the shell that we've created for ourselves. It is a process of widening insight into the true reality. So again, this is completely positive, because you start to see and you start to have encouragement in that, I guess I'm seeing it differently than I used to. And you can check, of course, is this just some sort of blind faith? But it's not, because the process itself is without blind faith. It is this experiential looking at your mind, practicing the virtues, thinking about it, analyzing it, abiding in different states, and then seeing the result, experiencing the result. Finally, it's the spiritual elevation to the non-degrading liberation. Spiritual elevation to the non-degrading elevation. The Four Noble Truths also reveal the misconceptions regarding the nature of existential life and its cause, elimination, and process. First Noble Truth shows the fourfold misconceptions that life is by nature pure, peaceful, enduring, and endowed with an independent eternal self or soul. So these are the famous viparyasas, they're called, the overturnings. That this goes way back to the beginning, where it's this again, these are the views that they said are like a ox cart that turns over. These are perversions. Now, unfortunately, the word perversion in modern English has come to mean, all sorts of various judgmental things about different basically sexual habits and stuff, but it doesn't mean that. Perversion is an ancient Anglo-Saxon word, and it just means overturned. So these are the views that are completely overturning reality. And what are they? Well, see if I can remember the Sanskrit. One, pure. Yeah, so we think that everything's pure, right? But when we start to look at it, there ain't nothing that's pure. uh, then two, peaceful. But if we look, everything's kind of in a state of agitation. Enduring, we think that there's everything is permanent, but of course it's not. It's impermanent. We can't find a moment of permanency, but it appears that way. And then finally, endowed with an independent eternal self or soul, Atman. So it's on Atman. The Buddhist truth is that there's no enduring eternal self or soul. Rather, it's this dynamic energy that we put a name onto. The second truth shows four misconceptions that cyclic existence emerges without appropriate cause. That's wrong. That it emerges due to a unitary cause and such as an eternal reality. It's not right either. Three, that it's due to an immutable cause which manifests itself through mutable conditions. So they're going through all these different like logical possibilities to show you that suffering has causes.
What page is that?
This is page 430 in the Mahamudra notes. Yeah, a good question though, Rogo, because one difficulty of this text, which is outstanding, is that it doesn't have an index. So you kind of remember what you read in there and you start digging through the notes. The notes themselves are wonderful though, just to read those. Actually, this came about, Lobsang Lalungpa was this tremendous Tibetan aristocrat from an old family. Wonderful, wonderful man. He translated the life of Milarepa, and when the 17th Karmapa, I think 17th, previous Karmapa came to the United States for the first time, Chogyam Trungpa had invited him, and he was giving teachings, I think, in Santa Fe, and Lobsang Lalungpa lived in New Mexico. And he went up to get a blessing from the Karmapa, and the Karmapa gave him this text and said, "You should translate this." So he did, and it's an extremely valuable book. Um, well, I'm not going to get into all the details on it, but if you look in the notes in the Mahamudra text, page 429, it's a discussion of the Four Noble Truths, again with this level of detail, but from the Mahamudra aspect of it, as opposed to this is a little bit more first turning of the wheel, and the Mahamudra is a little bit more third turning of the wheel, and first turning, second and third together, I might say. Scholars can dispute that with me, I'm quite sure. But nonetheless, it shows our misconceptions. So first of all, let's go jump right now to conclude the fourth noble truth, right? Nirvana shows that the four misconceptions. What is our misconception? One, that the process of liberation is perceived to be non-existent. We just completely doubt it exists at all. This is all just a big dance. Second, misconception that the perfect wisdom, which realizes true reality, is devoid of self-essence, is thought of as a wrong path. So you have that. There are many theistic people, Christians can be this, when they hear about emptiness, they think that's the wrong path. The previous Pope wrote like that, and he thought it was some sort of nihilism or something. This is, of course, the great advantage to being connected to a tradition. You see what the Tibetans have accomplished as a people, ordinary peasants, in the kind of quality that they have. But then on top of it, to meet the great teachers, you realize all that just goes out the window because you see what a human being is. Then third misconception, that there exists a path that is superior to the path of liberation. So there's a Vietnamese teacher, I don't know the name, a Mahayana teacher that passed away, I believe, in the 1950s or 60s. And he told a story of how when he was a little novice monk, he'd be doing his practice and everything, and his teacher would be meditating in his hut. And I always wondered, what the teacher was doing, what a highly esoteric thing the teacher was doing that he, the student, wasn't doing, that they were giving him, some practice to do, but there was some superior path of liberation that the teacher must be doing. And later on, he became a teacher and he realized he was doing the same thing. We think somehow it's a subtle ego way of putting ourselves down. I must be doing at the children's table or something. And then fourth misconception, that the noble path of Buddha is incapable of eliminating the miseries of life. It's a tough one. When people have that misconception, it's like we're doing stuff, but why are we doing it? We don't really, really believe it. So it's a great thing to have that kind of faith evoke. And of course, it comes from, this is the greatness of the Dharma, from the doing, from the study and the practice. The two together, they're kind of like a double-fisted kind of thing. For me, it's always been faith building that you see something like Tibetan civilization. This isn't something that's made up by some charismatic guy. I mean, with my daughters, when they're study of history and that, and you see the stuff that's happened over historical times. And I can't remember the book that's out, but this it's like the Gobi Desert in and the Silk Road, the Takma Lakan, I think it's called. This tremendously dry, harsh, because cold, a desert along the ancient Silk Road, and they found cities, towns anyway, buried in the sand there that they started redigging up, discovering in the early 1900s. And they found a room there that had like 100 dead monks. Some warriors came in and killed everybody. And so we have no idea the stories that have happened, the victories and the defeats. And in the midst of this, here's Megan studying these texts from back then. It's the same teachings. Some of them, they haven't monkeyed with it. But that's not because they are addicted to some obsessive trying to keep things changeless. No, they understand change. It's the fundamental to teaching is impermanence. But in the midst of that, all of these provisional teachings, and then later, of course, definitive teachings, but they all come out of that understanding of the First Noble Truth. It gives kind of like a foundation and just makes things so workable and solid in the good sense, and in the sense that you're not confused anymore and banging around trying to find a path. So no matter what kind of stuff someone throws at you, the First Noble Truth is suffering, dissatisfaction. Find something more universal than that ordinary people can relate to. It's one thing to say Buddha nature. We all have Buddha nature. Yes, that's true. Nothing wrong with that. But most of the people you talk to in life, that doesn't mean anything to them. And even for us, it's really just a concept. We're forced to use concepts. But at the same time, what's universal? Suffering. And that's the whole point. What are we doing this for? Eliminate our own suffering, but then greater, the suffering of all. Okay, so that's the Four Noble Truths, our little précis, right? Any questions or anything today on this? Questions? Okay, let's see what I can find for a dedication.
I could ask.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
He,
All right.
he needs, you need a mic. Get that man the mic.
Really, maybe it'll be a tough.
All right, I'll do it. I'll have a turkey on rye with Swiss. Okay, no, no, I'm sorry. Frank.
Yeah.
Um, so the Buddha said in a lot of teachings that the gods are real and that they're more numerous than people. Um, there seems to be benevolent, uh, divine beings that seem to be interacting with others. But what you're saying earlier is that they are not specifically controlling them like puppets, or are they just basically there from a Buddhist perspective? Are they teaching people? I mean, because it seems, because I have a lot of Christian friends, of course,
Yeah.
and they're believing this God who's is benevolently, like, teaching them love to be more Christ-like in the world, and and it seems to be working for them. They're really good people,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe even pulling their their strings, and it doesn't. That seems to be logical to me. That would eliminate free will. But then again, how much free will is there? I could get on that subject. Can you maybe talk perhaps more about the um the fact that we are not controlled by an outward, otherly being that
Yeah, it
God
has
looks.
to do with we don't actually, our nature is not an alienated state. So the fundamental split, I think, is the idea of a creator and a creature. So there's this gap, and you see this. You read the great mystical texts of. I'm more familiar with Christianity than the other traditions, but those mystics always seem to get in trouble with the church, because you can't ever say that I am God. That is like the height of arrogance. So they can't go there. So they have this tremendous, excuse me, devotion, but it comes from the need to have an outer object of devotion. Now we do that too, but in the same time, at the end of it, though, we dissolve it into ourselves. And with the tantra, of course, we are it, but then we dissolve that, so we're not even attached to that. So this path of the middle way, it's so subtle, but more profound. So there's nothing wrong with what they're doing, because people need. Um, when Gretchen and I went to India, again, we were so overwhelmed by kind of the craziness of Indian society. You'd go to buy a ticket, for instance, and everybody would be butting in line in front of you. There was no standards like that, and it seemed like a lot of the conversations you were having in public is sort of like people with their hands over their heads yelling and screaming. It was just too loud and too chaotic. And then we got to Sarnath, the first really Buddhist place, traditional Buddhist place that we had been. And actually, we've been in one other place previously, but nonetheless, the peace of it, because it just had right angles and had a rationality to it that wasn't a sterile rationality. It was alive, and yet it was ordered reality. It was seeing things as they are rather than just chaos. Um, so, but at the same time, when we saw that, I kind of had a sense, maybe for the first time, of like the power of Islam, because it just cuts away all that stuff and says, okay, it's like this. And there's an advantage there spiritually. You're coming out of, especially like in Africa, with so many pagan societies that have lost completely their traditional roots and probably their traditional teachings and elders and their own places in there, men and women supporting this society that has evolved since who knows what, 100,000 years ago. That's all been destroyed by modernity. But when you're faced with that, when you're faced with that kind of confusion, and then you see something that is sort of as black and white as Islam, I could see. So in the chaos of India, I felt like I had an understanding of the power of Islam, say in Africa or in India too. Certainly Pakistan and Bangladesh. That seems to be what happened when they invaded. Um, but the Buddhists are, I mean, really heroic. Really heroic. Instead of looking for, and that can be a helpful thing to have something just to rely on in that way. It gives a focus to the mind. It gives the practice of virtue for a transcendent reason and not just, I want to get a better job. And so there's benefit there. There's benefit there. But the Dharma, there's no alienation, and eventually that alienation has to be overcome too. Dharma is the one that does that. My own humble opinion. Okay.
That's really good, Frank. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. That was really awesome.
Yeah.
One more thing about that whole subject is,
Yeah.
is you said one of the things that, well, this was really profound, Frank. That was really cool. That Brahma's major mistake, Brahma's wrong view is that is this working?
Mhm.
Yeah. Brahma believes that Brahma created everything. And so when it comes back to the, you are God playing hide and seek with yourself, to quote Alan Watts,
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing. It's interesting. So it's really, it's, and then of course, once you realize that, I guess the little you dissolves into the bigger you, and then the bigger you dissolves into the, into everything, I guess, right? Or the nothing that creates everything. Is that how it goes? Can you expound on that incredibly vast subject, sir?
The other thing is that in a way it's dangerous to even talk about it, because when I see the example, say these Christian saints, I feel very humbled. So it's one for me to have some book knowledge and a little taste of experience, maybe, and have the confidence to say something like that. But you can say it to fellow practitioners, but you can't go out that and, like, giving lectures downstairs, for instance, in the church, because it just, I think there's so much profundity, like in Jesus's words, let he who has ears to hear, hear. I don't see Rinpoche out there banging the drum and trying to get everybody to believe like he does. Of course, I think he's beyond belief, so that's understandable. But that's a great example, to be patient and to see people as your mother. I mean, I'm not out there trying to, well, she's passed away, but what are you going to do with your mom? You have a certain kind of love and patience, and you feel like the connection of that connection just stays. There's actually, that's beyond any kind of catechism or anything that someone's going to attach to, and then we're supposedly good. But if you're coming out of a hellish, chaotic state, I mean, it's really wonderful. But I can't help it. I see Christianity through Buddhist eyes.
All right.
And I just see this profound statements in the New Testament, especially. And, I just feel like a lot of Christians don't really appreciate the depths of that. Although they obviously have some sort of attraction, which is
Yeah, it's
good.
amazing you said that, Frank, because I was raised Catholic,
Mhm.
and deeply moved by Christianity, and then
Mhm.
to finally start studying Buddhism and to have it profoundly hit home what Jesus was actually talking about.
I have that sense
Pretty
too.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'll tell you, when I was less mature, we were living in Minneapolis, and the Jehovah Witness came by, and I let him in, so I thought it'd be fun to talk. And I'm a jerk, and I was telling him, what do you make about this statement? And Jesus said, that a bunch of his disciples, and he said, the kingdom of heaven is within. And I like that. I like that. And the Jehovah Witness said to me, "Oh, no, you're misunderstanding." No. When he said that, his disciples were making a big circle around him. So he had 12 people standing around him. And so he was saying, the kingdom of heaven, that's me. I'm within the circle. So they just have a totally outer view of it. And you can't really criticize that, because that's where they're at. That's real for them. So there's something they can do about that. That's positive,
Wonderful.
going in the right direction. Yeah.
Well said, Frank. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Oh, I just made a lot of errors. Those who subdue by any skillful means, with miraculous activities, according to the phenomenon of sentient beings, all 100,000 dakinis, may your unconditioned wishes be fulfilled. Holders of unobstructed miraculous activity, keepers of pure samaya, dharmapalas, may your wishes be fulfilled. Whatever samaya of the Vajrayana tradition is broken, is openly confessed. May outer, inner, and secret obstacles be purified in inconceivable, unwavering, flawless wisdom light. May all supreme and common cities and activities be accomplished in this life, and may every last one be free. Svaha. Okay, everybody. Onward and